You're not ungrateful. You're awake. This is the Dignity Room, a place that's always yours. Come in.
There's something you know that you don't tell anyone. You've done the numbers, maybe after episode 22, or maybe longer before that, in a quiet moment you haven't told anyone about. And you know what the real number is. The one that's yours alone. And the number is smaller than it should be, much smaller. Given everything you've built and everything you earn and everything you contribute. And underneath the practical problem of that number, there's something else. Something that doesn't come up when people talk about financial independence or woman and money or building a cushion. Something quieter and harder to say. Shame. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you are capable, educated, high-functioning woman who knows, when she's really honest, that she couldn't stand on her own right now if she had to. And that gap between who you are in the world and what the number says feels deeply, let's say, wrong. So today is for that, the part nobody names, the part that keeps women stuck longer than the practical problem does, the shame of depending. The shame we are talking about today isn't the shame of poverty. It isn't the shame of having made bad choices. It's something more particular than either of those. It's the shame of a specific contradiction. On one side, a woman who is visible, capable, who runs things, who earns well, who people rely on, who has built a professional identity around being competent and independent and the one who handles things. On the other side, a woman who, if she's honest, couldn't sustain her life as it currently is without someone else's income, who has very little in her own name, who in the most practical sense is dependent. That gap between the public identity and the private financial reality is the specific location of this shame, and it's one of the most isolating feelings there is, because the more capable you appear, the less possible it feels to say the true thing out loud. The woman you could tell are the woman who seems to have it more together than you, or there are your friends inside the same shared life, or there are people who wouldn't understand, so it stays private. And private shame is the kind that festers. So where does this shame come from? Because I think it helps to look at it directly rather than just feeling it as a vague weight. So part of it comes from the same place as the guilt we talked about a few episodes back. You've built your identity around being capable. The competent one, the one who doesn't need help. And financial dependence feels like evidence against that identity, like a crack in the version of yourself you've worked very hard to maintain. So, yeah, there's something more specific underneath that. You probably absorbed somewhere along the way a certain version of what a successful modern woman looks like. So, like independent, financial capable, in charge of her own life. So, the woman on the book covers and in the interviews who talk about their own money and their own choices and their own everything. And you're not quite that. Not yet. Not in the numbers. And somewhere at some level, you've decided that means you failed a test. That a truly capable woman wouldn't be here. That you should have seen this coming, done it differently, made it different choices along the way. So here's the thing. The situation you are in isn't the result of personal failure. We went through this in episode 22. It's the result of 4 completely normal steps: the merge, the career gap, the financial architecture, and the disappearing surplus. That happened to an enormous number of women who are making completely reasonable decisions at each point. The fact that a reasonable set of decisions led to a dependent situation doesn't make you weak. It makes you a person who was operating inside structures that were not designed with your independence in mind. That's a different story than the one shame is telling you. Shame says you should have known better. You should have done it differently. This is evidence of who you are. The real story says this is a situation a lot of women are in. It happened through a pattern, not through a flaw. And the situation is something you can change. Okay, now let's look at what this shame is actually doing to you. Because I don't think it's just an uncomfortable feeling. I think it's actively keeping the situation in place. Here's how. As long as the situation is a secret, it can't change. It can't change because you can't get real help with something you've never said out loud. You can't get advice from a financial professional if you are too ashamed to tell them the full picture. And you can't have a conversation with your partner about building something for your own if you can't first admit to yourself out loud to another person that the current arrangement isn't working for you. The shame keeps everything private, and private problems tend to stay problems. So here's the second cost. Shame is exhausting. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, grinding background way. Carrying a secret that feels like a character verdict takes energy. Every conversation about money that you have to navigate carefully. Every time someone talks about financial independence and you smile and say nothing, that management costs you something. Every day, in the same way that managing the divided self or carrying the invisible load costs you. It's a constant low-level drain that sits underneath everything else. And the third cost is the most important one. Shame is a very effective way to stay still. Because as long as this feels like evidence of who you are, rather than a situation you're in, it's very hard to move. You can't easily improve a character flaw, but you can very particularly change a situation, and those are two completely different possibilities. The shame wants to make this a verdict. It wants to say, this is you, this is your failure. This is what you get for not being smarter or braver or more organized. None of that is true. What's true is that you are in a situation, a real, uncomfortable, fixable situation, and the first step out of it is not a plan. It's letting the situation be named out loud to one person. So it stops being a secret and starts being something you can actually work with. So let's look what maybe can be the first step out of this. Because of course you have to test it for you, but hey, I gave you some ideas and you take this what fits the best for you or what feels the best. So it's not a plan, not an account opened, not a conversation with your partner. All of those are real and they matter, but none of them are what shame actually needs first. What shame needs first is a witness. Think of one person, not the most impressive person in your life, not someone who will offer immediate advice or immediately fix something or making you feel judged. Someone who is safe, who you trust, who will hear the real thing and stay and say the true thing to them. Not everything, not the full picture with all the numbers, just the real sentence. Something like, I've been thinking about money lately and I realized I have almost nothing that's actually mine. That's been hard to sit with than I expected. That's enough. You don't have to explain the whole arc. You don't have to have a plan. You just have to let one person hear the true version. So it's no longer entirely private and no longer entirely alone. Here's what tends to happen when women do this. Two things. First, the other person either shares something real back or at minimum doesn't react the way the shame predicted. Nobody laughs, thinks less of you, or uses the information against you. The worst case scenario that the shame promised rarely materializes. Second, the problem, the actual practical situation, feels smaller after being said out loud. Not smaller in reality, smaller in the body, because shame shrinks when it's witnessed. It doesn't disappear, of course, but it stops being the loudest thing in the room. You are a capable woman in a situation that you've been carrying alone and in silence for too long. Say the real thing to one person, let's say this week. Let it stop being a secret you manage and start being a problem you can actually address. Because problems you can address are completely different from character verdicts you are stuck with. And this is a problem, which means it has a solution. So 3 things to take with you today. 1, the shame of financial dependence is specific. It lives in the gap between who you appear to be and what the numbers actually say. It's not the shame of failure, it's the shame of a contradiction. And it's one of the most isolating feelings there is, because the more capable you look, the harder it is to say the true thing out loud. 2. The shame is actively keeping the situation in place. Private problems stay problems. And as long as this feels like a verdict on who you are rather than a situation you're in, it's very hard to move. You can't improve a character flaw, but you can change a situation. Those are two completely different possibilities. And 3, what shame needs first is a witness. Find one safe person. Say the real sentence, not the whole plan, not all the numbers. Just the true thing. Say it out loud to one person. Shame shrinks when it's witnessed. The problem doesn't get smaller, but it stops being the loudest thing in the room, and then it becomes something you can actually address.
Before you go, this podcast is where I talk. Dignity Queens is where we talk together. It's a circle of women who carry the same question you do and who show up for each other in their own words. If you're ready to stop doing this alone and actually be part of something, that's where to find them. The link's in the show notes. This was The Dignity Room.